Well, everyone, as we close out this chapter today, we're going to be looking at substance abuse, and it is a problem not only in society, but in our businesses as well. We're also going to take a look at the employee handbook. We're also going to take a look at discipline. So we've got a lot to cover today. So let's go ahead and get started as we finish up the employer and the employee responsibilities and rights. Okay, everyone, today we're going to finish up Chapter 15, and we're going to take a look at the beginning with drug abuse, and then we're going to take a look also at employee handbooks, and then, unfortunately, leaving off with discipline and termination. Substance abuse and drug testing. Now, here's something that really you're going to have to stay fairly on top and ahead of the game, as the laws are changing right now, and I'm just scrolling through this stuff. Today we're legalizing marijuana in many areas, so what may be illegal today may not be illegal tomorrow. But right now, 70% of people who illegally use drugs are employed. That means chances are you've got drug abusers in your workplace. So you have to be mindful of that. And I'm not talking about just marijuana or PCP, but people who are using these opioids today. The opioid pandemic is being felt throughout not only the private world, but also in the public sector in business. Now, there are laws that address drug testing, and you are certainly within your purview to do that, but it is governed by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Alcoholism is a disability, and many people suffer from that, and its dependency on illegal drugs is not. So alcohol, you would say it would be one. Illegal drugs, it's not a disability. So it's amazing how we classify different levels of sin, because alcoholism is the only disease really that people pay to get. That and illegal drugs, but a Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988 also talks about government contractors, and they must try to eliminate employee drug use. So these are some far-reaching and some fairly lofty goals in the workplace, especially the way drugs have permeated society. Now, drug testing and employee rights. As I said before, it is your right to test the employees if needed. There are policies for conducting drug tests, however, and random testing of all employees at periodic intervals is acceptable. But again, you have to make sure that you have procedural justice. That means the drug testing applies to everybody. And distributive justice. That means the sanctions or the consequences for one has to be standard for everybody. So you can't pick and choose who you want to discipline and those who you'll let go. Testing only in cases of probable cause, and probable cause may be really what you deem necessary. For instance, let's say a person was just acting strangely in the workplace, talking about drug abuse, or they smell of drugs or act like they're on drugs. You can test them for that. Also, testing after accidents. It's standard in many trucking companies, transportation companies, anything and any time you're working with equipment. If you have an accident, oftentimes they will test you right on the spot for drugs. Now, the test conditions, you have to realize that the consequences of the job outweigh privacy concerns. They may say, no, it's a violation of my privacy. Well, your job, the consequences of that job may outweigh those privacy concerns. So they need to have a written statement that they understand these requirements and that they could be subject to drug testing, and once it's signed, they really don't have a leg to stand on. And accurate test procedures are available. I would recommend hiring a vendor to do that. That takes away the subjectivity of the employer, and it also gives more credibility to the drug testing process. Again, written consent of the employee is obtained. The results are treated confidentially, and the employer has a drug program, including an EAP. So you can offer these things to the employee, but they have to know that they can be tested at any time if there is reasonable doubt as to their sobriety. Now, when it comes to policies, procedures, and rules, the difference here is that policies are just general guidelines that help focus organizational actions. Procedures are the ways that you maintain or uphold those policies. It's the customary methods of handling activities, and then rules are specific guidelines that regulate and restrict individual behavior. Now, how do you know the company's policies, procedures, and rules? Well, you have in the next slide the employee handbook. Now, the employee handbook handles the policies, the procedures, the benefits that the company offers. It communicates culture, the benefits, the attendance requirements, pay, safety, discipline, critical information. Every company should have some type of employee handbook that gives you an idea of what the company is about and what they expect and what they will distribute as far as rewards and benefits and so forth. Effective when in common language instead of legal fashion. There's a whole different language in the legal community, and it's best to translate that legal jargon into just plain English so people would understand exactly what is being expected, because they could argue they couldn't understand the writing, so how could they be held accountable? Now, this slide talks about some of the recommendations for creating an employee handbook. And here, really, they give you the examples, but you don't want to, I had an attorney one time say, you don't want to be so specific in everything that you paint yourself into a corner. And you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're so broad that it could be challenged in a court of law. So just be careful when you're doing it. For instance, at my church, we have currently about a 10-page little booklet on our handbook and our bylaws and procedures and so forth. When I became the pastor, the previous pastor had one that was over 140 pages. That thing was bigger than a telephone book. So you don't want to be so burdened down with rules and regulations that you can't do anything. And also, it could work in your against you if you are so specific and you don't leave yourself room for maneuvering. For instance, you have a late policy. First offense, verbal warning. Second offense, formal written personnel file. You're going to document it. Third offense, you're fired. Now, what if that person has an offense where it was, blatantly they were late, they had traffic or whatever. The second offense, they were doing something, maybe the electricity went out or something happened, whatever. You have a second offense. And then the third offense, they do it. But what if this is one of your stellar workers? What if this is someone who had good reason to be late? Maybe there was a death in the family, or maybe someone had to go to the emergency room, or maybe the person was just, having to go to the hospital themselves or something. So if you're not careful, you can back yourself into a corner that you can't get out of. According to your policy, that stellar employee who had good reasons to be absent, they were terminated, or he or she was terminated, and you can't, get out from under it. Either that, or you've got to scrap your whole absentee policy. So you might want to use words may include termination, may include other disciplinary actions, and that gives you kind of the freedom to be able to maneuver, but you still have to maintain distributive justice. You can't fire one and let another go. So just be careful in your words that you use, and not be so rigid that you can't work around or have some flexibility there. Some of the topics for a handbook you see here in 15.8, I'll let you guys take a look at that. It's pretty well straightforward. Again, just be careful and use common sense when you're communicating your employee expectations. Now, when we talk about communications, we have basically two types: downward. Downward communication flows from the top to the rest of the organization. It informs employees about what you expect and the goals. Now, upward communication gives the managers the ability to learn about the ideas, concerns, and information needs of employees. So downward communication is pretty much, this is how we're going to do it, this is what we expect, and you follow suit. Upward communication is hearing from the employees how these policies are affecting them, how they feel about the organization, and how they perceive the organization. So really, the book doesn't talk about it, but you would really want two-way communication, which means that you're going up and down. Both sides are talking to each other, and normally that's how it usually is in today's modern organizations. Discipline is an unpleasant word, but it is necessary. Discipline, when you think about it, the word we get disciple comes from discipline, and it's just a student, someone who is learning. So discipline is a way of teaching. In this case, it's a process of corrective action used to enforce rules within the organization. And the effective discipline technique is aimed at problem behaviors and not at the employee personally. Don't take it personally when they are not doing what they should be doing. You aim everything at the behavior itself to correct that. It's monitored by HR to ensure that actions follow corporate and legal guidelines, that they're appropriate and they're fair and consistent, and then relies on supervisors and managers who are properly trained on when and how to use discipline. Discipline is not bullying. Discipline is not being overbearing. It's designed to take a look at whatever deficiencies there may be within the organization and the people and correct those deficiencies. Now, there are positive approaches: counseling, written documentation, final warning, and then discharge. So you have a progression here. You have a progressive discipline approach as well that takes you down through the steps that a person can go through. And in the next slide, we see the progressive discipline process. As I said before, verbal offense for the first offense, second offense, written reprimand, third offense, maybe suspension, fourth offense, discharge. But again, what if they have good reason for that offense? So you have to make sure that you are prepared to go through this process, because if you don't, you won't be able to use it against anybody else. And if you do use it, you may lose someone who is a good worker, but because you were so rigid, you have no other reason other than to let that person go. Now, employee discipline and the reason why managers might not use it. Well, the culture may avoid discipline. You may have it in the handbook, but nobody really enforces it. We have that in our churches. We have it in organizations today where we've gotten away from discipline. The lack of support by higher management. make sure that whatever you do, you have the full support of management, higher management. Because if they are not with you on it, if they're not willing to commit like you're just spinning your wheels. And I've seen that happen time and time again, where they expect the manager to lead and to discipline, but yet they won't support any type of reprimand or disciplinary actions. And it really renders that manager ineffective because he or she has no power, and the employees see that. Guilt about past behavior, that could be, well, I used to do it, and so forth, so I'll let the other person off. Fear of losing friendships, avoidance of time loss, fear of lawsuits. These are all reasons why many people don't discipline today. And today, as we get into the learning organization, discipline is something that is really on the back burner. The philosophy today is that if we hire the right people, if we motivate them, encourage them, resource them with all the tools that they need, and just allow the good part of them to flourish, that they're going to do that. But we know that not everybody is going to do that, so we still need a process to be able to discipline. Termination is when you remove that person from that job. They can be terminated for numerous reasons, but they do need to be treated with respect and dignity. And you can have a separation agreement where the terminated employee agrees not to sue the employer in exchange for specified benefits. So they have to agree to that in writing, that they won't sue, and you may give them a bonus, a separation bonus. You may give them an extra month of separation pay or whatever, but here you just agree that we're not going to come back, the employee is not going to come back and try to retaliate for any type of separation. Well, folks, that's all we have for this week. We've looked at some of the salient issues that are involving employees right now and the employer, and I hope you take it to heart and be able to apply these concepts, in your particular workplace.
Well, folks, when we talk about discipline, it's never a pleasant word, and it's especially not pleasant when you're having to exercise it, just like in the church. It's not meant to be fun or be trivialized. It's necessary to correct behaviors, and if the person is not willing to conform, then just as the church can remove them, so too must you remove the workers from the workplace. If we do our due diligence, hiring from the very beginning the right people, making sure we're maintaining and monitoring performance, and we are encouraging them along the way, getting to know them, and then also letting them know what the expectation is, and proving that by giving them procedural justice and distributive justice, chances are we're going to have a healthy workplace. Have a good weekend, and we will see you next week with Chapter 16.